Lena Whitmore stood in the kitchen, her hand around a porcelain mug she didn't remember filling. The scent of chamomile barely registered. What she heard, what always echoed, was absence. Garrett hadn't come home the night before. Again, the kitchen clock ticked like a whisper. 6:42 a.m. Her blouse was already pressed, tucked into a navy skirt that fit her like a glove. Her hair pinned, shoes beside the door. Even in her stillness, she looked composed, the kind of woman who'd smile tightly at the grocery store and make strangers wonder what it was like to live her life. Perfect. Polished. Beautiful. Barren. Margaret needs her breakfast by 7, she reminded herself softly. Not because she'd forgotten, but because saying it aloud made the day feel real. Margaret, her mother, was the one anchor Lena had left. She lived 3 miles away now, in a memory care home overlooking the river, where the windows stayed open and the nurses spoke like Sunday school teachers. It cost more each month than Lena made in 2. She didn't have the money. Garrett did. And that was the beginning and end of everything. The click of her phone screen lighting up jolted her. A text. Garrett. Meeting ran late. I'll catch up at the office. Wear something red for tonight. Big event. Don't be late. No greeting. No apology. Just direction. Lena stared at the message for a long time before locking the phone again. The mug trembled in her grip. She set it down carefully, like it might shatter anyway. The event he mentioned was a gala at the Battery Club, a tech investors gathering hosted by some reclusive CEO who'd relocated from Atlanta. Bo Remington. Garrett had been name-dropping him for weeks, floating phrases like strategic synergy and vertical partnerships. Over dinner, Lena no longer cooked. He wanted an intro. Lena understood the pattern. Her husband didn't ask. He placed. He positioned. He styled. And lately, he used her. She drove to work with the windows down, even in the early spring chill. Charleston's streets were still waking. Dog walkers in light sweaters, cyclists weaving past tourists with cameras too big for their necks. The world looked soft at 7:30. Her world stayed sharp. Inside the accounting office on Broad Street, Lena took comfort in structure. In numbers, there were answers. Formulas. Logic. Life didn't operate with such courtesy. Her co-workers liked her. She was warm, but reserved. The kind of woman people felt safe near, but didn't pry into. If they noticed the light gone from her eyes these past few years, they didn't say it. At lunch, she texted Annalise. Lena, you still doing arrangements for the Battery Club tonight? Annalise, yep, just loaded 30 centerpieces into the van. It smells like heaven and pollen murder. Why? Lena, I'm going. Garrett needs me there. Annalise, of course he does. You okay? Lena stared at the blinking cursor for a moment too long, then typed. Lena, I'm wearing red, his idea. Then added a second message. Lena, I'll see you there. She didn't mention the hollow in her stomach, or the way red felt like a costume instead of a choice. The rest of the day passed like dust through fingers. At 5:30, Lena drove home, showered, and slipped into the dress Garrett had laid out the night before. A crimson silk that clung in places she wished it didn't. The back dipped lower than she liked. The neckline hinted more than it should. Her reflection in the mirror looked like someone else's version of her. When she arrived at the club, Garrett was already at the bar, laughing with 2 men in tailored suits. He barely looked at her when she approached, just pressed a drink into her hand and whispered, "Smile more. He's here tonight. Room 302. Her brow creased. Who? He didn't answer, just walked away. The night moved in slow motion. Strings played near the marble staircase, and servers floated with trays of champagne and tiny crab cakes. Lena stood by a floral arrangement she recognized from Annalise's workshop, a cascade of orchids and eucalyptus. It grounded her somehow, reminded her that something in this room was hers, if only distantly. She found Annalise 10 minutes later, adjusting a ribbon near the fireplace. "You look like you need to breathe," Annalise said. Lena nodded. "He's angling for something big tonight. I'm part of it." Annalise's smile dropped. "What does that mean?" "I don't know yet," Lena replied, but her gut did. Near the second hour of the gala, Garrett circled back. "He's in the lounge upstairs. Room 302. Just stop in and say hello. Trust me." "Garrett." "Lena." He cut her off with a smile too smooth to argue. "Just be gracious. It's a business play. You're part of the brand, remember?" A dozen thoughts clamored in her chest, but none of them made it past her lips. Instead, she nodded slowly. She made her way up the sweeping staircase, her heels whispering against the velvet runner. The hallway outside room 302 was quiet. Golden lamplight flickered against the polished wood floor. She stood at the door, hand poised to knock, heart stammering. A single breath. Then, too, she knocked. "Come in." Beau Remington stood by the window, a lowball glass in one hand, the skyline of Charleston reflecting in the pane behind him. Tall, sharp-featured, with sleeves rolled casually and no tie. There was a stillness about him that made the air feel different, alert, but not tense. When he turned to face her, his expression shifted subtly, first polite curiosity, then something closer to confusion. She began, unsure. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "I was told to come say hello." He stepped forward, slowly, not closing the distance, just easing it. "You must be Lena." She blinked. "How did you—" "I've heard Garrett talk." Loudly, at length, about his wife and his plans. She exhaled, shame rising like a flush. "I'm not part of the pitch. I didn't know I'd be sent here." He tilted his head slightly, watching her. "Would you like to sit?" he asked gently. Lena hesitated, then nodded, her voice catching. "Only for a minute." Beau offered her a glass of water, not wine. No agenda. No smirk. Just a man who'd seen something he didn't like and responded with grace. Lena sat on the edge of the couch, hands in her lap, unsure if she was supposed to apologize. For Garrett, for herself, for the dress she hadn't chosen. But Beau didn't ask for explanations. He just said, "You look like someone who doesn't get heard very often." That was when she nearly cried, not because he was wrong, but because he was right, and he said it without judgment. Downstairs, Charleston society clinked glasses and struck deals under soft lighting. Upstairs, in that quiet room, something else had begun. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. And for Lena Whitmore, that was more intimate than anything she'd felt in years. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The room held a silence that pressed gently against the walls, like breath held too long. Beau Remington leaned slightly against the console table, his glass untouched now. The amber in it caught the lamplight, casting flickers across the room, but his attention hadn't left her since she sat down. Lena's hands rested in her lap, folded tightly. She stared at them, then at the glass of water on the table in front of her. Condensation pooled at the base, unnoticed. Everything about her posture was controlled, except her eyes. They kept darting toward him, uncertain, curious, watchful. She hadn't said much. She didn't need to. Beau had already heard enough. Garrett had spoken of his wife with the same transactional tone he used to describe marketing campaigns. Polished, polite, excellent at making people feel comfortable. That was the line Beau remembered most, as if she were a feature, not a person. And now here she was, draped in red silk that didn't suit her, perched like she was bracing for impact. "You don't have to stay," Beau said finally, his voice low. "Whatever this is, I won't play a part in it." Lena looked up, startled. Her lips parted slightly, then closed. She nodded once, slowly. "I didn't know what he planned," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I thought it was a simple introduction. I should have known better. You don't need to explain." He set the glass down. "But I'll listen if you want to." She laughed gently, not from humor but the absurdity of it. "You're very calm for someone who was just used as a bargaining chip." He smiled faintly. "It's not the first time someone's tried to sell me something I didn't ask for." That got a real laugh, quiet and brief, but genuine. It passed quickly, replaced by the weight of everything unsaid. Lena leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "You ever feel like you're standing in a room full of people, and somehow you're still invisible?" she asked. He studied her. "More than I care to admit." Their eyes locked. Something passed between them then. Quiet recognition. Not romantic yet, but intimate in a deeper way. Two people who lived among others but were rarely seen. From the hallway, faint music drifted up through the old wood floors. The gala was in full swing below. Garrett was probably floating from group to group, practicing charm like it was a business tactic. Lena didn't mention him again, and Beau didn't ask. After a moment she stood. "I should go." He stepped toward the door, pulling it open for her without rushing her out. "If you ever want to stop being invisible," he said as she reached the threshold, "there's a florist in town named Annalise. She does the flowers at my place. Says you're the best listener in Charleston." Lena blinked, confused. "Annalise?" He smiled. "She talks a lot about her best friend. Always says, she listens so well. I forget I'm talking to someone." "Thought that might be you." Lena's mouth opened in surprise, then closed. Her smile returned, softer this time. "She never told me you knew each other." "I like quiet people," he said simply. She nodded once, stepped into the hallway, and the door shut behind her with a click that somehow echoed longer than it should have. Downstairs, Garrett found her by the fireplace, drink in hand, his expression unreadable. "Well?" he asked, sipping. "Did he listen?" She didn't answer. She just took a sip of her own glass and looked past him to the centerpieces. He leaned in slightly, his voice low. "Don't look so serious. It's just strategy." Lena's eyes slid back to him. "Everything's strategy with you." Garrett didn't seem to notice the shift in her tone. He simply smiled and turned away to shake another hand, already spinning the next pitch. That night, when she returned home, Lena didn't sleep. She slipped out of the red dress, folded it carefully, and placed it in the back of her closet, like a memory she didn't know what to do with. The next morning, she dropped by Annalise's shop on her way to work. Sunlight spilled through the glass front windows, catching the floating pollen motes like fairy dust. The scent of lavender and freesia hit her like a memory of peace. Annalise looked up from tying a ribbon. "Well, if it isn't Charleston's finest in disguise." Lena arched an eyebrow. "You didn't mention Beau Remington was your client." "I don't advertise my clientele," Annalise said with a wink. "But I may have dropped your name once or twice." "You didn't." "I absolutely did. He listens." Rare thing for a man with a seven-figure company. Lena leaned against the counter, arms folded. He said something about not wanting to be part of Garrett's tactics. Annalise's hands paused. She looked up. He's not like the others, Lena. I barely know him. I'm not saying fall in love with him. I'm saying maybe you needed someone to see you, and maybe he did. Lena stared at a bouquet of wildflowers by the window. It's not that simple. No, it never is, Annalise said. But you're allowed to want something more. Later that day, back at the office, a package arrived at Lena's desk. Inside was a single white camellia in a slim glass vase. No note. Just a small tag at the base. Camellia. Admiration. Respect. She stared at it for a long time, the weight of its meaning settling quietly over her. That evening she visited her mother. Margaret sat by the window in a soft sweater, looking out at the fountain in the courtyard. Her mind had wandered to somewhere distant, but when Lena entered, her eyes brightened for a moment. You wore red last night, Margaret said softly, voice thin but clear. Lena froze. How did you know that? I saw it, dreamed it maybe, her mother whispered. You looked beautiful, but sad. Lena sat beside her, took her hand. I was both. They watched the courtyard together. Two women tethered by love, loss, and a quiet strength the world never asked for but always leaned on. Outside, the camellia bloomed. Simple, elegant. Unassuming, but still it bloomed. The camellia sat on Lena's desk for 3 days. She didn't move it, didn't ask where it came from, but every time her eyes drifted toward the slender vase, her thoughts unraveled. Back to the quiet room upstairs at the Battery Club, to the sound of Beau Remington's voice when he said, "You don't have to explain." It wasn't the flower itself. It was the fact that someone thought she deserved one. On the 4th day, she finally took the vase home, setting it on the kitchen counter near the sink, where the late afternoon sun touched it just enough to make the glass shimmer. Garrett didn't notice. His eyes rarely lingered on anything that wasn't reflective of him. He came home that night humming softly, the kind of calculated hum that meant a deal had gone well. Met with Remington's team again today, he said, unbuttoning his cuffs as he wandered toward the fridge. They're cagey, but I'm making progress. Lena didn't look up from the dish she was rinsing. Did you talk to him directly? No, Garrett replied casually, pulling a bottle of sparkling water. Still warming them up? A guy like that? You don't rush him. She dried her hands. What if he's not interested? Garrett smirked, twisting the cap off. Everyone's interested. They just don't know it yet. His confidence unsettled her in a way it hadn't before. It used to impress her. Now it felt like walking barefoot across smooth marble, cold, pretty, and somehow hollow. Later that night, she stared at the ceiling while he slept beside her, oblivious. Her body was still, but her thoughts ran in circles. Was this it? Years of calculated smiles and strategic dinners and sleeping next to someone who didn't see her? The next morning, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. If you have time for coffee this week, I'd like to ask you something. B. She sat with the message for 20 minutes before replying. Lena. Tomorrow morning. I have a break at 9:30. Beau. There's a small cafe off Church Street. Corner tables usually empty. At 9:25 she arrived. The bell above the door chimed, soft and familiar. The scent of cinnamon and roasted beans filled the air like memory. Beau was already there, his sleeves rolled again, a leather notebook in front of him, untouched. You found it, he said with a small nod. Lena removed her coat slowly. I wasn't sure I would. Bo didn't push. Just gestured to the seat across from him and waited. A waiter appeared. She ordered chamomile tea. Bo asked for plain coffee, no cream. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that let thoughts breathe. "I hope I didn't cross a line with the flower," he said finally. Lena looked down. "You didn't." "It surprised me, that's all." He nodded slowly. It wasn't a gesture. It was a message. She looked up, curious. "I admire how you carry yourself," he said, voice steady, "even when someone else tries to define you." Her eyes softened, but she didn't smile. "That's a heavy compliment for someone you just met." "I've spent my life around people who talk too much," Bo replied. "I notice the ones who say little, but mean everything." The tea arrived. She wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. It made her think of the last time someone spoke to her without an agenda. Bo leaned back slightly, as if unsure how far to go. "What I wanted to ask, if it's not too forward, is whether you've ever thought of doing something different." "For work." She blinked. "Why?" "Because you strike me as someone who's always giving, rarely choosing." Her chest tightened. "My mother's care is expensive. Garrett handles that." "I understand," he said gently. "But if you ever want something else, I know people who could help." "Not out of charity, out of belief." Lena looked away. "I haven't earned that belief." Bo's voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't need to. You already live it." She swallowed, unsure how to respond. At that moment, a woman approached the table, clipboard in hand. She was in her 30s, dressed smartly. Clearly someone used to moving quickly and being listened to. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, glancing at Lena. "Bo, the numbers came back on the waterfront project." "We'll need to pivot." He nodded once. "Thanks, Alyssa. I'll look at them later." She hesitated. "Do you want me to wait?" "No," he said, not unkindly. "I'm in a conversation." Lena watched the woman retreat, expression unreadable. "She's important to your team," she said. "She is," Bo replied. "But I don't believe in multitasking when someone's being honest with me." Lena stared into her tea. No one listens like that anymore. Bo folded his hands. "Then let me be the exception." There was a pause, not just in their words, but in the moment itself. "I used to draw flowers," she said suddenly, surprising even herself. "Before the numbers, before Garrett. I had a sketchbook filled with them. Each one meant something. I wanted to open a small cart near the riverfront." "Why didn't you?" "I was told it wasn't practical," she said simply. "That I'd fail. And failing would mean disappointing the people I love." He tilted his head. "That's a heavy price for a dream." It was easier to tuck it away. "Do you still have the sketchbook?" She hesitated. "Maybe." "Then maybe it's time to open it." Lena didn't answer, but something flickered in her. Not hope, not yet, but curiosity. The thought that maybe, just maybe, something inside her wasn't lost, just quiet. Their time was up. She had to return to the office. He didn't stop her, didn't ask to see her again. But as she left, he said something that stayed with her long after she walked into the sunlight. "Not all gifts come with strings, Lena." She paused at the door, hand on the frame. "And not all kindness needs permission," he added. She nodded once, the words settling into her like warm rain. Outside, the wind picked up gently, rustling the hem of her coat. She pulled it close and walked on, half in the life she knew, half in a new one she hadn't dared to imagine. Yet. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought matter to me either way. The sketchbook was buried under linens in the guest bedroom closet, wedged between old sweaters and a box of tangled holiday lights. Lena hadn't touched it in years. The pages were stiff from time and a little curled at the corners, but the drawings, they hadn't faded. Tulips in early bloom, peonies with petals that spilled like secrets. A lily drawn in pencil so soft it looked like it might sigh if touched. She sat on the edge of the bed and flipped through them one by one, her thumb pausing at the notes she'd once written in the margins. For Mom, lavender eases the nerves. Weddings should start with dahlias. Start a cart, name pending. She smiled. Then her throat caught. A dream shouldn't feel like an artifact. Outside, Charleston breathed in its usual rhythm. Gulls over the rooftops, church bells somewhere downtown, a breeze warm enough to carry jasmine through open windows. But inside the Whitmore house, time stood still. Garrett was late again, dinner untouched. The kind of lateness she'd stopped asking about. Her phone lit up just past 9. Garrett, late drinks with the Remington lead. Be home after. She stared at the message, fingers hovering. Not a request. A report. And then, without fully knowing why, she took a photo of one of the sketches. A daisy cluster drawn the night after her mom's diagnosis. She attached it to a message. Lena, do you think something like this could work? The reply came faster than she expected. Bo, yes. Even more if you believe in it. She held the phone, her thumb over his words. Simple. Assured. And exactly the kind of voice she hadn't had in her life for too long. The next afternoon, Bo called. Not a message, not a meeting request, just his voice, direct and steady. I've got a contact, he said. A supplier for mobile kiosks. They build custom. If you ever want to take that card idea seriously, I'll introduce you. Are you offering to fund it? She asked quietly. No, he said without hesitation. I'm offering to support it. There's a difference. She breathed out slowly. Support comes with expectations. Not mine, he said. Just yours. The line went quiet for a moment. I'd like to show you the garden, he added, if that's not too much. She blinked. Garden? Rooftop? My building. It's quiet. You might like it. It wasn't the invitation that stirred her. It was the way he said you might like it, like her opinion mattered more than the gesture itself. She agreed. The next evening, just before sunset, Lena stood in the elevator of Bo's building, the city falling into golden hour outside. The ride up was smooth, nearly silent, and when the doors opened onto the penthouse level, she felt like she'd stepped out of Charleston and into a film. Bo greeted her at the rooftop entrance, his shirt sleeves rolled, palms dusty from planting. I forgot gloves, he said, brushing soil from his fingers. The lavender's stubborn. Lena laughed softly. Lavender usually is. They stepped into the garden together. It wasn't large, but it was alive. Herbs in clay pots, roses along the railing, ivy curling toward a trellis strung with lights that hadn't yet been turned on. This is beautiful, she said, her voice catching. He didn't respond right away, just let the silence stretch, soft and full. I come up here when I need to remember what matters, he said. Code and capital don't bloom like this. She walked slowly, fingers grazing the rosemary. My mother used to say that plants listen, she murmured. They know if you're tense. She could talk a wilting orchid back to life. Bo watched her. I believe that. They reached the edge of the garden, where a bench overlooked the harbor. She sat, the wind catching her hair and tossing it gently across her cheek. He stayed standing for a moment before sitting beside her. "Garrett wants this deal more than I realized," he said quietly. "His assistant called my office today, unofficially. She's persistent." Lena's posture stiffened. "He didn't tell me. I didn't think he would." She looked down. "He doesn't like sharing details until they benefit him." Bo hesitated. "You don't have to tell me anything about your marriage, Lena." "I know," she said, her eyes still on the horizon. "But I might anyway." A beat passed. Then she added, "He pays for my mother's care. It's not just financial, it's leverage." "Emotional leverage." "I'm sorry," Bo said softly. She shook her head. "Don't be." "I let it happen, slowly, yes, but still. I gave up pieces of myself without realizing." "Maybe," he said, "but that's not weakness. That's love in the wrong hands." She turned to him then, her expression open and raw. "Why do you care?" she asked. "We've barely spoken, and yet you see things." Bo looked at her for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to be used for someone else's goals, to be praised when you're useful and forgotten when you're not." He looked away. "My father sold our house when I was 16, said it was an asset. My mother and I ended up on a friend's couch. He never looked back. I promised myself I'd never be someone's stepping stone again." Lena's voice softened. "And now you help people avoid that fate?" "I try," he said. "At least the ones who remind me of who I might have become." The lights in the garden flickered on above them, casting a soft glow across the bench. "You're not responsible for fixing me," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but maybe you're ready to start building something that belongs to you." She didn't speak, but her hand drifted toward the hem of her sleeve, fingers brushing the fabric like she wasn't sure what to do with the silence. Bo stood. "Come back up here sometime. Bring that sketchbook." She looked up. "You remember that?" "I remember everything you said in that cafe." Every word sounded like someone trying to remember what they used to love. She smiled. Barely, but it reached her eyes. As he walked her back toward the elevator, the city below glowed like a promise. And when the doors slid shut, Lena pressed a hand to her chest, as if trying to steady something quietly waking up. Not love. Not yet, but a longing for a life she might still get to choose. Charleston rain came in like confession, quiet, steady, and uninvited. Lena stood at the window in her office watching it paint the sidewalk in silver as people scurried under umbrellas. She barely heard the hum of printers or the muted clack of keyboards behind her. Her fingers rested on the edge of her desk, but her thoughts were still on the rooftop. On the scent of rosemary, and the way Bo's voice had softened when he talked about his mother. He remembered everything she said, every word. That morning, she'd woken to find her sketchbook open on the kitchen table. She didn't remember leaving it there, but maybe something inside her had. A part that wasn't asleep anymore. Her phone buzzed, a message from Annalise. "Annalise, Tessa came by the shop just now. Garrett's assistant. Looked like she'd just seen a ghost." Lena blinked. "Lena, did she say anything?" "Annalise, no. Just asked if you were happy working with your husband, then bought a bouquet and left. That wasn't like Tessa." The girl had always been sharply professional, a little too polished, like Garrett. The thought unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She tucked the phone away just as her supervisor called her into the conference room. A routine check-in, numbers lined up. Reports were filed. Nothing felt wrong, except everything beneath the surface. As she walked back to her desk, she passed a glass panel where her reflection appeared, poised, perfect, and exhausted. She paused, adjusted a strand of hair, then reached into her purse and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The daisy sketch. She slid it into her top drawer, one step closer. That evening, Garrett arrived home just after 7, his coat slung over one arm, phone pressed to his ear. He didn't greet her, just walked past with a nod and disappeared into his office. The door clicked shut. Muffled talking followed. Lena stood in the kitchen, fingers brushing the edge of a plate she hadn't yet washed. She moved like someone trying not to disturb the air. When Garrett finally emerged, he was upbeat. "Beau's team finally bit," he said, opening the fridge. "They're scheduling a presentation next week. Told them I'd bring my best charm. You're coming with me." She didn't turn around. "Did you ask me?" He paused. "We've been over this, Lena. You're part of the package. You represent stability." She turned slowly then, her eyes steady. "Or silence." He closed the fridge. "What does that mean?" But she didn't answer. She walked past him, picked up her coat, and left without another word. She didn't go far. Just around the corner to Annalise's shop. The lights were still on, even though it was past closing. Inside, the scent of fresh-cut stems and eucalyptus greeted her like an old friend. Annalise looked up from a vase she was rearranging. "Didn't expect you tonight." "I didn't either," Lena said, exhaling. She walked to the counter, fingers brushing over a cluster of white freesias. "Do you think it's wrong to want something just for me?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Annalise didn't flinch. "No. I think it's survival." Lena's throat tightened. "I'm afraid. If I walk away from everything, what's left?" "You," Annalise said gently. "That's what's left." They stood in silence until the door chimed again. Tessa. She stepped in, hair damp from the drizzle, a folder clutched to her chest like armor. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I don't mean to intrude." Lena turned. "You're not intruding." Tessa hesitated. "I shouldn't be here, but I've seen things, heard things. And I think you should know." Lena felt her stomach drop. "Know what?" Tessa's voice was barely a breath. "Garrett's using you. Not just emotionally. He's built a whole narrative around your marriage to sell trust to investors. It's in the pitch decks. There's even a photo of you two in the opening slide titled, 'A Life Built on Partnership.'" Lena closed her eyes. "I thought you knew," Tessa added. "I didn't realize until recently that he's been curating your image." Annalise moved closer. "Why now? Why are you telling her?" Tessa looked at Lena. "Because I thought I wanted to be like him. Polished, powerful, but now I'm not so sure. And I couldn't sleep knowing he was selling your story like a brand." Lena nodded slowly. "Thank you." Tessa held out the folder. "This is everything I could print without raising suspicion. Emails, decks, notes from internal calls. Just do with it what you will." She left as quickly as she'd come. Lena stared at the folder in her hands for a long time. Annalise didn't push. Just placed a cup of herbal tea on the counter and went back to her arrangement. At home, Lena didn't confront Garrett. She didn't even look at him. She walked into the guest room, closed the door softly, and opened the folder beneath the yellow lamplight. And there it was. Her life in bullet points and high-resolution images. Marriage used as marketing, trust as a tool. She looked at herself in those photos, smiling, eyes turned toward Garrett like he was the center of her world. But she remembered those nights, the awkward angle of a forced arm around her waist. The barely whispered, "Just smile and nod." She didn't cry. Not then. Instead, she picked up her phone. "Lena, are you free tomorrow morning? I need to ask you something." "Bo, name the time." She typed, 9:30, your rooftop. And before she could lose her nerve, she added, "I'm bringing the sketchbook." Then she turned out the light. For the first time in a long time, she slept through the night. The morning air was still, the sky a pale wash of blue that hadn't yet decided whether to shine or storm. Lena stood at the rooftop entrance of Bo's building with her sketchbook pressed tightly to her chest, like something sacred. She had barely spoken since opening that folder last night. The images, the words, the manufactured narrative, they had hollowed her out and filled her with something she hadn't expected. Resolve. The door opened with a soft creak, and Bo stood there in rolled sleeves and worn leather boots, as if he'd known she would come and that she'd bring everything with her. "Good morning," he said gently, stepping aside. She nodded. "Thanks for making time." "I always will." That sentence, simple, quiet, unwavering, landed in her chest like a stone skipped across calm water. He didn't rush her, didn't ask questions, just led her to the bench by the rosemary bush and waited. She sat. The sketchbook remained closed on her lap. "I brought it," she said, staring out at the hazy outline of the harbor below. "The sketches. The ones I told you about." "I'm glad," he said, easing down beside her. "Do you want to show me?" Lena didn't answer at first. Her fingers brushed the edges of the worn cover, flipping slowly to the page she'd marked the night before. It was a small bouquet, wildflowers arranged around a single daisy, drawn in colored pencil. She handed him the book. Bo took it like it was breakable. "I made this one after my mother had her first fall," Lena said softly. She didn't remember my name that day, but she remembered that daisies meant new beginnings. "I started drawing them after every hard day. There were a lot of drawings." Bo looked up at her. "It's beautiful." "No," she said, voice tight. "It's personal, and I've been keeping it buried because someone convinced me it wasn't worth showing." He held her gaze. Someone was wrong. Lena blinked fast, trying to push away the heat behind her eyes. "Garrett's been using me as a business pitch. My smile, my marriage, my name, it's all in that folder. He built a whole story around me and sold it to investors like it was a brand." Bo's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "I'm sorry, Lena. I let it happen," she whispered. "I stood beside him in every photo. I smiled. I stayed quiet." "You survived," Bo said. "There's a difference." The rooftop garden was quiet, only the breeze rustling through the lavender pots. Below them, Charleston began to stir. Buses, footsteps, voices that had no idea someone was learning how to breathe again. "I want to do it," she said suddenly. "The flower cart. I want to start it, even if it's small, even if it fails." Bo's face lit with something between admiration and relief. "I think it's time," he said. "I already looked into a few local vendors. There's a leasing space near King Street that might work. Low foot traffic but high visibility." She turned to him. "You already looked?" He gave a small smile. "I don't like wasting time when something's worth building." A pause stretched between them. Lena's voice softened. "I'm scared." "So was I," he said. "The first time I built something on my own." "But fear's not the enemy. Silence is." She inhaled slowly. "Then I guess I'm done being quiet." He didn't reach for her hand. Didn't move closer, but the look in his eyes was steadier than any touch. as if he knew how close the ground still felt beneath her feet, but also knew she'd rise. She stood, the sketchbook still open in his lap. "I need to take care of something before I let this idea take root," she said. "Something that's long overdue." Bo nodded. "Whatever you need, I'm here." As she turned to leave, he called after her. "Lena?" She paused. "Your dream doesn't need anyone's permission." She gave a small, grateful smile. "Neither do I." Later that afternoon, Lena visited her mother. Margaret was sitting near the window in her favorite knit cardigan, the one with daisy buttons. "Hey, Mom," Lena said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. Margaret looked at her with a mix of recognition and fog. "You look like spring today," she said softly. Lena smiled. "I brought something." She opened the sketchbook on her lap and flipped through page after page. Daisies, tulips, wildflowers shaped like promises. Margaret's fingers drifted over one of the drawings. "These are yours?" "They are." Margaret blinked slowly. "You should show the world. People need to see something beautiful." Lena swallowed hard. "I think I will." That night, Garrett was late again. She waited at the table, not to serve him, but to speak. He walked in with his usual rhythm, tie loose, phone in hand. Another long day. "We're almost there with the Remington account." She stood. "I won't be part of the pitch." Garrett looked up. "What?" "I won't be in the photos. I won't smile for the story you're selling. I'm done letting you use me." He laughed quietly, like she'd just made a joke. "Lena, this isn't about you. It's about both of us. You benefit too." She picked up the folder from the counter and held it up. "I know exactly how I'm being used. And I'm choosing to step away." He frowned. "What are you going to do? Start selling daisies from a cart on the sidewalk?" Lena didn't flinch. "Exactly." For the first time, Garrett didn't have a response. His silence was louder than any insult. She walked past him, calm and composed, her steps echoing softly through the house. Upstairs, she opened her closet and pulled out a soft gray sweater she hadn't worn in years, the one she always imagined she'd wear behind a flower stand, with the wind brushing her hair and the sun warming her face. She didn't cry. She didn't doubt. She just folded the sketchbook beside her and whispered into the quiet. "It's time." And this time, she meant it. The flower cart was nothing more than a sketch on recycled paper and a handful of hopeful calls. But in Lena's mind, it already had weight. It had color, purpose. A name still undecided, but a place in her life that felt real. She sat across from Bo at the cafe off Church Street, the one where everything had first shifted, and unrolled a new page from her sketchbook. This one had careful measurements. Ideas for signage. Even a section marked seasonal blooms. Curated stories. Bo leaned in, brushing a corner of the page with his thumb. "You're building a whole experience." Lena nodded. "I don't want it to just be flowers. I want people to remember how they felt when they bought them." He smiled. "You're already thinking like a founder." The word made her pause. Founder. She'd spent so long defining herself by what she supported. Her mother's care, Garrett's ambitions, someone else's structure. Now, suddenly, she was at the start of something that wasn't reactive. It was hers. "I've never pitched anything before," she admitted, folding the sketchbook gently. "Not like this." "You don't need a pitch," Bo said. "You need someone to listen." She looked at him. "You mean like you?" Bo's eyes met hers, steady. "Exactly like me." There was a moment, just one, when everything around them softened. The clatter of plates in the background, the shuffle of shoes across the tile. Even the passing conversations faded beneath the quiet hum between them. Then her phone buzzed. "Garrett, need you at the office gala next Friday. Key investors. Wear navy." Her jaw tightened. Bo saw it. "Let me guess." "Garrett?" She tucked the phone away. "He's not used to being ignored. Does he know about the cart?" "I haven't told him," she said. "Not yet." "Why not?" Her voice faltered. "Because part of me still worries I need his permission." She looked away, ashamed. Bo's voice dropped. "Lena, you don't owe him your silence." She nodded, barely. Bo leaned forward. "Tell me what you need from me." She hesitated, then said, "I need to feel like I'm not crazy." "You're not," he said without a beat. "You're brave." That evening, Lena returned home and found Garrett at the kitchen island, scrolling through his tablet, wine glass full beside him. He glanced up. "You've been out a lot this week." She opened the fridge, keeping her back to him. "I've been busy." "With what?" She turned, slow and calm. "With something that doesn't involve you." Garrett tilted his head. "Is this about the cart?" Lena froze. "You know," he smirked. "Charleston's not that big, Lena. People talk." Annalise mentioned something at a client event. Her pulse spiked. He took a sip of wine. "Look, I don't mind hobbies. But be careful. The optics matter, especially if we're presenting as stable partners. Investors like consistency." She stepped forward, her voice clear. "I'm not part of your pitch deck anymore." He blinked. "Excuse me? I'm not going to the gala. I'm not posing for staged photos. I'm not selling the lie." Garrett set down the glass, his tone still measured but firm. "That's not a good look." Lena folded her arms. "Then find someone else to look the part." They stood in silence, two people who had once shared a dream. His dream. Now, one of them had stepped away from the script. Later that night, she drove to the memory care center. Her mother sat near the window, knitting with yarn that barely held shape anymore. "Hi, Mom," Lena said softly, settling into the chair beside her. Margaret smiled. "You smell like eucalyptus." "Have you been with the flowers again?" Lena smiled. "Always." She reached into her tote bag and pulled out another sketch. This one a mock-up of a sign. The bloom cart. Petals promises. Her mother's fingers touched the corner. "Did you draw this?" "I did." Margaret stared at it for a long time. "It's strong." Lena's breath caught. "You think so?" Her mother nodded. "Because it has your hand in it." Lena placed her hand over her mother's gently. "I think I'm finally doing something for me." "You always did," Margaret whispered, even when no one saw it. That night, Lena didn't sleep. But it wasn't from fear. It was from planning. She made lists, looked up vendors, called Annalise at 10:30, who answered on the second ring with, "Tell me you're finally jumping." "I'm ready," Lena said. "Then I'll get the permit paperwork," Annalise replied. "We'll make it real." The next morning, she met Bo again, this time outside a small warehouse that backed up to a quiet alley off Queen Street. The place was unremarkable, but Bo gestured with an energy she hadn't seen in him before. "They store custom-built carts here, some even refurbished from old food trucks." They stepped inside, the air rich with cedar and paint. A man approached, a gray-bearded technician named Roy. "You the one with the flower dream?" he asked. Lena smiled, surprised. "I guess I am." Roy led them to a small, cream-colored cart, its paint faded but charming. The awning needed stitching, but the wheels were solid, and the counter space was wide enough to display beauty. "I can fix her up in 2 weeks," Roy said. "You give me your colors and that logo, I'll make it feel like yours." Bo watched Lena as she touched the wood counter, her fingertips tracing possibility. "What do you think?" he asked. Lena turned, eyes bright. "I think I've never wanted anything more." As they walked back into the sunlight, she paused beside him. "You did this," she said. "You brought me here." "No," Bo replied. "You brought yourself. I just held the door." And as they stood there, side by side in a quiet Charleston morning, the wind catching the hem of her sweater and hope settling into her shoulders like a familiar shawl, Lena knew something was changing. Not just around her, but inside her. This wasn't survival anymore. It was a beginning. The scent of fresh paint lingered in the air like a promise. Lena stood under the shade of a live oak as Roy and his assistant wheeled out the nearly finished cart from the warehouse garage. It gleamed beneath the soft Charleston sun, with its new cream panels and hand-lettered sign in faded gold. The Bloom cart. The awning fluttered slightly in the breeze, striped in soft green and ivory. Classic. Welcoming. Hers. She didn't move at first, just stood there, one hand over her mouth, the other at her chest, as if her heart had risen too high and needed holding. Roy tipped his cap. "She's ready for the road test, Miss Whitmore." Lena blinked, laughing through the emotion. "She's perfect." "Better than I imagined." "She's yours now," he said. "Go make something beautiful with her." The wheels clicked softly on the pavement as they rolled her into the alley, and Lena walked behind it, eyes scanning every curve. It wasn't just a flower cart. It was the shape of freedom. Behind her, Bo stepped out of his car. He hadn't said much since their last meeting, and his silence hadn't felt distant. It had felt intentional, like he wanted her to take these final steps herself. But today, there was pride in his eyes. Lena turned toward him, brushing her hair back from her face. "Well?" He smiled. "She looks like you." She tilted her head. "Meaning?" "Strong lines, a little grace." "Built to last." Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. "You helped make this happen." "I didn't create it," he said. "You just needed someone to remind you that you could." Lena glanced down the quiet street. "Now I need to tell him." "Garrett?" Bo's expression didn't shift, but something behind his voice did. She nodded. "I won't let him find out from someone else. I owe him honesty, even if it's late. Do you want me to be there?" Lena looked at him carefully. "No, I think I need to do this on my own." That evening, the house felt too quiet again. Garrett hadn't come home yet, and for once, she was grateful. It gave her time to prepare. She made tea, sat at the kitchen table with her sketchbook, and laid out a simple folder next to it. Inside were the registration papers for the Bloom cart, a mock schedule, and the first invoice from Roy. She didn't owe him justification, but she wanted him to see it wasn't impulsive. It was a decision. When the front door finally opened just after 9, she didn't flinch. He walked in, talking on his Bluetooth headset, voice rehearsed and polished. "I can get you that in the morning," he said, waving off her presence like background noise. She waited. He finally ended the call and dropped his keys on the counter. "Busy day. You eat?" "I waited," Lena said, folding her hands. He eyed the table. "What's this?" "I started a business." Garrett frowned, picking up the papers. "What kind of business?" "A mobile flower cart," she said evenly, "called the Bloom cart. It launches in a few weeks." He blinked, brows rising slightly. You're serious? I've never been more. He let out a slow laugh, like he wasn't sure if he was amused or annoyed. Lena, come on. A flower cart. You're walking away from a very curated image we've built. I didn't build anything, she said. You did. Around me, without asking. He picked up the invoice and flipped through it. This looks expensive. It's already paid for, she said, her voice calm. Garrett set the paper down. And you didn't think to discuss it with me? No, Lena said, because it has nothing to do with you. He stared at her for a long moment. You've changed. I've remembered, she corrected, who I was before the silence. Garrett looked at her then, not the way a partner looks, but the way a businessman sizes up a shift in leverage. It told her everything she needed to know. This doesn't work if we're not aligned, Lena. Then maybe it doesn't work. She didn't say it with anger, just truth. He left the kitchen without another word. The next morning, Lena stood at the waterfront market as vendors set up their booths. Annalise was already there with her own floral tent, hands deep in petals and arrangements. Lena wheeled her cart into position just beside her, feeling every step like a heartbeat. Annalise looked up and beamed. Look at you. I almost didn't sleep, Lena said, breathless. You shouldn't have, Annalise teased. You're in labor, Lena laughed, then fell quiet. Beau appeared a few minutes later with coffee in hand, wearing a soft denim shirt, and that quiet, unreadable expression she'd come to recognize as his version of worry. You made it, she said. I wouldn't miss it. He handed her the cup. First customer. She took it, fingers brushing his. A pause. Then she asked, Does it feel real to you? He looked at her, then at the cart, then back again. It feels like the start of something that already mattered before it ever began. Lena stepped behind the counter, unlatched the hatch, arranged the flowers she'd prepared in glass vases, sunflowers, daisies, eucalyptus bundles tied with twine, and then the first customer approached. An elderly woman in a blue linen coat, eyes soft and curious. These are lovely, she said. Is this your first day? Lena smiled. It is. The woman picked up a small bundle of daisies. I used to have these in my kitchen window every spring. Lena wrapped them carefully, tied the ribbon, and handed them over. That'll be $6, she said. The woman paid, then paused. Thank you, dear, for remembering the little things. As she walked away, Lena looked down at her hands that once only signed checks and folded laundry, and held silence. Now, they held blooms. The day passed in moments like that. Small, steady, real. And through it all, Beau stayed nearby, not as a shadow, not as a savior, but as something steadier. By sunset, the cart was nearly empty. Lena wiped the counter clean, the golden light washing over the cobblestones. Beau stepped closer. How do you feel? Like I finally took a breath, she whispered. He nodded. You're doing something beautiful. She looked at him. So are you, she said. And in the hush between them, in the falling light, something deeper began to bloom. Unspoken, but impossible to ignore. The rain came just after closing. Not heavy, not loud. Just a soft mist that swept through the cobblestone alley like a breath held too long. Lena pulled the striped awning down over the cart, her fingertips damp, her chest full of something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't exhaustion. It was deeper than that, like satisfaction laced with quiet fear. The kind you feel when your life has shifted and you're not sure the ground will hold. She looked around. The other vendors were packing up. Annalise gave her a wink from across the way and mouthed, You did it. Lena smiled back, her hands tightening around a small cloth as she dried the counter one last time. A voice behind her broke the rhythm. "Big first day." She turned. Beau stood beneath an umbrella, water beading on the shoulders of his jacket. His expression was unreadable, but warmer than she'd seen in days. His presence always felt like stillness in motion, like something could happen, or nothing at all, and both would be enough. "It was everything I hoped," she said, then paused. "And harder than I expected." Beau stepped closer. "It usually is. The right things always are." Lena nodded, then looked out at the harbor, where the fog rolled in low, swallowing rooftops and softening edges. Something about today felt different. He studied her. "Different how?" "I wasn't afraid of being seen." Beau said nothing. Just let the moment hold. She tucked a few loose stems into a basket beneath the cart, then glanced back at him. "You stayed all day." "I didn't plan to," he said, "but I couldn't leave." Her breath caught slightly. "Why?" He looked directly at her. "Because watching you stand in your own story was the most honest thing I've seen in years." Lena lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. "That's a hard thing to hear, and harder to believe." "Then believe this," he said, voice low. "You've changed the way I look at quiet strength." A long silence followed, the kind that doesn't need filling. Beau stepped back, almost reluctantly. "Walk with me?" She hesitated, glanced at her cart, then nodded. "Let me lock it up." They walked slowly through the narrow streets, the city wet and golden under the street lamps. Their shoes tapped lightly against the stone, the only sound besides the rain. She kept her arms folded, not out of cold, but to keep from reaching out too soon. "I used to think purpose was about power," she said after a few blocks. "Now I think it's about peace." Beau's voice was soft. "Power never lasts. Peace, real peace, that's rare." They turned onto a quiet street, lined with old porches and hanging ferns. The kind of street where conversations lingered on steps and time moved slower. He paused beneath an awning. "Lena, can I ask you something?" She stopped beside him. "Of course." "What are you still holding back?" The question hit her chest like a slow ripple. She didn't answer right away. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her sleeve. "Memories," she said. "The ones that whisper I don't deserve this, that if I get too close to happy, it'll slip away." He nodded. "I know those whispers." She turned to him, eyes full of water, not from the rain. "I want to trust what's growing between us," she whispered. "But I've lived so long in someone else's version of love. I'm not sure I'd recognize the real thing." Beau took a breath. Not a sigh. Something deeper. He didn't touch her. He just let his words land carefully. Real love doesn't ask you to disappear. It invites you to expand. Lena stared at him, her mouth parted slightly. Her heart caught somewhere between fear and ache. She wanted to step forward, to lean into the warmth of what he was offering. But something in her still held on to the past like it owed her protection. Beau saw it, and he didn't push. "I'm here," he said, "whether you're ready tomorrow or next spring. You don't need to rush your bloom." The words undid something inside her. He smiled gently, stepped into the rain, and left her under the awning, soaked in silence, but not alone. The next morning, Lena sat at her mother's bedside, arranging a small vase of violets on the nightstand. Margaret's breathing was slow, her mind elsewhere, but her fingers tapped lightly against the blanket as if reaching for something just out of view. "I did it, Mom," Lena said softly. I opened the cart. People came. They smiled. Her mother didn't respond, but a tear slid down the edge of her cheek, unnoticed. Lena wiped it gently. You always said flowers make people feel remembered, she whispered. Today, I felt remembered too. She stood, placed the sketchbook on the windowsill, and looked out at the soft light pouring over the courtyard below. Back at home, a letter waited on the kitchen counter. No envelope. Just a folded sheet with Garrett's handwriting across the top. Lena unfolded it slowly. I know I've lost control of the story. And maybe I never had it to begin with. I won't stop you, Lena. I never should have tried to own you in the first place. I hope the cart brings you more than I ever did. No apology, but no manipulation either. It wasn't closure, but it was a door quietly closing. Lena folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not to reread, just to remind herself that letting go doesn't always look like a battle. Sometimes it's just choosing to stop carrying what was never yours. And in the quiet that followed, she breathed. Then, slowly, she smiled. A full, earned, radiant smile. It was just past noon when the first message arrived. From Tessa. Call me when you can. Something's happening. You need to know before the gala. Lena read it twice before slipping her phone back into her apron pocket. The cart was busy today. Tourists moving slow in the spring sun. Locals stopping by with familiar smiles. She'd just finished wrapping a bouquet of tulips for a young woman in a sundress when Annalise leaned over from her stall, her voice low but urgent. You hear about Garrett? Lena's stomach tightened. What about him? Annalise stepped closer. Word is he's still pitching your marriage as part of his image. His assistant told someone at a networking brunch yesterday he's planning to introduce you as a co-founder of his next venture. Lena froze. But I told him I was out. Doesn't sound like he's listening. She stood there, the ribbon she was tying suddenly loose in her fingers. The whole point of building the Bloom cart was to step out from behind someone else's story. And now, Garrett was dragging her back into it, this time without even asking. Beau arrived an hour later, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the cart like it might be hiding more than peonies and eucalyptus. I got a call from someone on Garrett's PR team, he said quietly. They're coordinating some photo ops at the gala. You and him. Together. Lena's chest tightened. I'm not going. Beau nodded. That's your choice. But if you don't show, and Garrett's still pushing the couple image, it sends the wrong message. I don't owe him a narrative, she said. I owe myself the truth. Beau looked at her for a long moment. Then tell it. Her breath caught. Publicly. Not for revenge, for clarity, he said. People don't always see the quiet withdrawal. Sometimes they need the story rewritten in front of them. The idea made her pulse quicken. She wasn't afraid of Garrett, not anymore. But she was afraid of being misread, of standing in the spotlight and being asked to explain something she spent years surviving silently. But Beau was right. The silence wasn't safety anymore. It was a weight. I don't want it to be dramatic, she said. I want it to be honest. Then tell your version, your way, he said. At the Women's Roundtable next week. I spoke to the organizer this morning. There's an open mic segment. It's not about business. It's about beginnings. She blinked. Why did you call her? Because I believe in what you're doing, Beau said. And I think more people should hear how it started. That night, Lena sat at the foot of her mother's bed, her hands resting in her lap, the sketchbook unopened beside her. Mom, she said, voice soft. He's still using our story. Still telling people we're a team. Margaret stirred slightly. Then speak louder, darling. Lena stilled. What did you say? Her mother opened her eyes slowly. If someone's telling the wrong story, you speak louder. Lena exhaled a slow, full breath. You really are still in there, aren't you? Margaret gave a faint smile. Some stories don't fade. Not if they're real. The round table was held in the upper room of an art gallery on East Bay Street. Tall windows, high ceilings. Rows of folding chairs facing a small podium and a single mic. Lena almost turned around twice. Once on the steps, once in the hallway. But she could feel the weight of everything she hadn't said pressing her forward. She'd brought her sketchbook, tucked under her arm like armor. The room was half full when she arrived. Mostly women, business owners, creatives. People who had clawed something out of the soil of doubt. When the open mic began, 3 women went before her. A chef who left her job to open a food truck. A single mother running a tutoring center from her garage. A grandmother who became a beekeeper at 62. Then Lena stood. She didn't step up fast, didn't look polished, just honest. Her hands shook slightly as she set the sketchbook on the podium and opened it to a page with daisies in soft yellow pencil. My name is Lena Whitmore, she began. And for a long time, I let someone else tell my story. The room hushed. I was married to a man who saw my steadiness as an asset, my silence as strategy. I smiled in photos I didn't pose for. I stood in rooms where I wasn't invited. I was placed. She paused. But I'm not bitter. I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to show you this. She lifted the sketchbook and held it open. The drawing faced the room. I used to sketch these after hard days. Flowers that wouldn't wilt just because someone forgot to water them. I forgot to water myself for years, until one day I stopped waiting for permission. There was no applause, just breath. Deep and full. I started a flower cart this spring, she continued. It's small. It's mine, and every bouquet I wrap reminds me that there's no such thing as a wasted root, only blooms waiting for their season. She stepped down. No fanfare. No speech. Just truth, placed gently in the center of the room like a petal on still water. Beau was waiting outside, leaning against the brick wall, hands in his pockets. When she reached him, he didn't say a word. He just looked at her like she'd arrived. Not to him, but to herself. She stood in front of him, unsure what to say. I'm proud of you, he said simply. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't do it for attention. I know. I didn't even do it for him. I know that too. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single camellia, soft pink, tied with a white ribbon. For you, she said. He took it slowly, like it meant more than words. What's it mean? He asked. She smiled. Admiration, and the courage to speak when it matters. And in the golden light of that Charleston evening, nothing needed to bloom louder than that. The day after the round table, Charleston felt different. Lena walked the streets like someone freshly unburdened. The air seemed lighter, the sun warmer. Not because anything around her had changed, but because she had. The fear she'd carried like a second skin had started to peel away, replaced by something steadier, quieter, resolve. The bloom cart stood proudly at its corner near the waterfront, trimmed with a fresh bouquet of zinnias and lilac. She arranged them carefully, fingertips brushing petals like piano keys. Behind her, people passed with coffees in hand, smiles soft, greetings warm. She'd built this, and she wasn't invisible anymore. Her phone buzzed. A message. Tessa, he's using your photo in the gala presentation tonight, even after everything. I tried to pull it. He overruled me. Lena stared at the screen. The air around her stilled. The gala, Garrett's prized stage. The night he'd planned to parade their past like proof of stability and charm. Despite the letter he'd left, despite her walking away, he hadn't let go. She sat down on the edge of the cart and stared out at the slow-moving river. The idea of returning to a space that had once silenced her made her skin prickle. But staying silent now, that would undo everything she'd rebuilt. She picked up her phone and called Annalise. "You're thinking about going, aren't you?" her friend said before she even said hello. "I can't let him speak for me," Lena said. "Not again. You want backup?" "No. I want truth." That evening, she wore a soft navy dress. Not flashy, not sharp, just honest. Her hair pinned loosely, makeup light. She didn't want to perform. She wanted to show up exactly as she was. When she arrived at the Charleston Art Conservatory, the gala was already buzzing. Waiters floated with champagne trays, conversations hummed beneath vaulted ceilings, and the string quartet played something elegant but distant. Garrett stood near the main stage, surrounded by donors. He wore the smile she'd memorized, the one he used to disarm and charm. And there she was, her face, on the backdrop of his presentation screen. A slide labeled, "Partnership That Works." She stepped into the room like a whisper, but her presence turned heads. Beau found her first. He stepped up beside her without saying a word. His hand hovered near hers but didn't reach, not unless she asked. "You don't have to say anything," he said quietly. "But if you do, I'll be here." Lena looked ahead, her voice even. "It's not about anger. It's about truth." The MC tapped the mic. "Please welcome Garrett Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Strategies." Polite applause. Garrett stepped up to the podium, sleek and confident. "Thank you all for being here tonight. It means everything to have the support of a community that believes in not just innovation, but integrity. When I started this company, I did it with a simple idea that partnerships are the foundation of success. And I've had the privilege of building one of the strongest—" His eyes landed on her mid-sentence. Lena stepped forward. There was a shift in the room, a ripple. Beau stepped aside, letting her pass, his hand brushing her back like punctuation. Silent support. Garrett's voice faltered. "Lena." She reached the stage, her eyes steady on him, then turned to the audience. The spotlight hit her gently, the way it only does when someone steps into it by choice. "Good evening," she said, her voice clear. "I wasn't on the program tonight, but I seem to be part of the presentation." A murmur swept through the crowd. "I just want to say one thing. Stories matter, the ones we tell and the ones we leave out." For years, I stood beside Garrett, smiling in pictures that weren't mine. I let my life be curated to fit a narrative that served someone else. Garrett stepped forward slightly, uncertain. "Lena, maybe we should—" She didn't flinch. "No, Garrett, you had your turn." The room hushed. "I'm not here to embarrass you," she said, softer now. "I'm here because there's a difference between being part of someone's success and being used as the illusion of it. I left quietly. I started a business on my own. I found my voice again, and I'm proud of that." She stepped back. "That's all." Applause didn't erupt. It bloomed, slow, steady, sincere. She walked off the stage without looking back. Beau met her near the exit. "You okay?" She smiled. "I'm free." Outside, the air was cool. She looked up at the stars above the live oaks, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was disappearing beneath them. She felt real, whole, heard. And beside her, Beau didn't say a word. He just reached for her hand, and this time, she took it. The next morning, the sun rose quietly over Charleston, casting a warm light across the harbor and through the windows of Lena's home. She stood at the kitchen counter in bare feet, slowly stirring a cup of tea, the memory of the night before still pulsing through her like the final note of a song. Her speech, the hush of the crowd. Garrett's stunned silence. But it wasn't the applause that lingered. It was the stillness in her chest, the feeling of release. She turned when she heard the soft knock at her front door, not hurried, not uncertain. Just steady. She opened it to find Beau standing there, a paper bag in one hand and that quiet half-smile she was beginning to read like a full sentence. "I brought muffins," he said. "I figured emotional breakthroughs require carbs." She laughed, motioning him inside. "Only if there's lemon poppy seed." He held the bag up like a prize. "I come prepared." They sat at the small breakfast table, sunlight spilling in across the wood. Lena watched him for a moment before speaking. "Everything feels still," she said, "but not in the way it used to." Beau unwrapped a muffin. "Still like peace?" She nodded. "Exactly that." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the kind of silence where presence says everything. Then Beau set down his coffee and looked at her, more directly. "There's something I've been thinking about," he said, "and I want to ask before I overstep." Lena tilted her head, cautious but curious. "Go ahead." "I've been considering opening a new division of the Remington Foundation, focused on supporting women-owned micro-businesses. Floral carts, mobile kitchens, art trucks. I want to fund them without strings, and I'd like you to lead it." She blinked. "Me? You've lived it. You've built something from nothing. You've navigated it with grace and grit. That's what I want leading the program." Her breath caught and she looked away for a moment, overwhelmed. "I don't know if I'm qualified." "You're not," he said calmly. "You're overqualified." She laughed, then sobered. "I've never managed a team before. I've never written grants or structured programs. I'll help you build the framework," he said. "You bring the vision." Lena stared down at the table, fingers brushing the edge of her mug. It would change things. "Yes," Beau said. "But it wouldn't take you away from the cart. It would expand your reach." She was quiet for a long moment. "Let me think about it." "As long as you want," he said. No pressure. That afternoon, Lena visited her mother. Margaret sat in a sunlit patch by the window, her hands curled softly around a fleece blanket. A small vase of daisies sat on her side table. Lena pulled up a chair and opened the sketchbook in her lap. "I might be starting something new again, Mom," she said gently. "Something bigger than I expected." Margaret didn't respond, but her eyes drifted toward the window, the corners softening. "I'm scared," Lena admitted. "But maybe scared is the start of something real." She sat in the silence, watching her mother's chest rise and fall in its slow rhythm, and let the idea settle. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the marsh, casting long shadows across the quiet streets, Lena found herself walking. No destination, just a slow movement forward. She passed the little shop windows, the iron gates, the old trees heavy with moss. She stopped near the water, where the sky turned gold and violet and the air smelled like salt and jasmine. Beau's words returned to her. "You don't need to rush your bloom." She turned, walked back toward town, and pulled out her phone. "Lena." I'm in. Let's build something that outlives us. The reply came quickly. Beau, welcome to the next chapter. And in that moment, Lena understood something she hadn't before. Not about love or business or even healing, but about herself. She wasn't rebuilding. She was becoming. The morning light crept gently across Lena's apartment, tracing the soft lines of change. Sketches pinned to corkboard, swatches of floral packaging samples strewn across the dining table, a legal pad filled with names for the new foundation division. For the first time, her life felt like it was expanding rather than shrinking into silence. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, phone pressed between shoulder and cheek as she balanced a pan of eggs with one hand. I don't want to call it something generic, she said, pausing. It has to mean something. Beau's voice came through the speaker, warm and thoughtful. What about the root fund? Simple. Symbolic. Everything starts from the root. She smiled. That's actually beautiful. That's your influence, he said. She plated the eggs, then sat down at the counter. Beau, are you sure about this? Putting me in a position with your name on it? I'm sure, he said. Because your name carries weight now, Lena. People listen when you speak. She was quiet for a moment. Then, it still surprises me. Good. Stay surprised. It'll keep you honest. Later that day, Lena met with Annalise in her shop, the air thick with the scent of hyacinth and early spring roses. She paced as Lena explained the opportunity. They want me to run it, Lise, a whole initiative. I'd be helping other women start businesses just like I did. Annalise wiped her hands on a linen cloth. And what part of this is bad news? Lena hesitated. It's public, and Garrett's still trying to get press. He's been quietly talking to reporters, spinning the narrative like I was just someone inspired by him. He's not saying my name, but he's implying things. Annalise's eyes narrowed. What kind of things? That I walked away from marriage into a business supported and structured by his early mentorship. That everything I'm doing now is thanks to the foundation he laid. Mentorship? Annalise scoffed. That man couldn't mentor a houseplant. Lena rubbed her temples. I just don't want it to become a spectacle. This isn't about proving him wrong. It's about proving me right. Annalise stepped forward. Then prove it, Lena. Outgrow him. That night, Lena sat by the window with her laptop open, staring at a draft of her upcoming press release, the formal launch of the Root Fund. The words were right, but something in her gut twisted. It didn't feel finished. She typed. I started the Bloom cart after walking away from a life that looked beautiful on the outside and felt hollow within. I wasn't rescued. I wasn't built. I bloomed. Then she added one final line. This is for every woman told she had to ask permission. She hit save, closed the laptop, then reached for her tea. The next morning, the piece was live. It didn't take long for the messages to come in, dozens at first. Then hundreds, women from all over, some local, others from across the country, sharing their stories, their still quiet dreams, their stalled beginnings. But one message stood out. Tessa, he's fuming. But your words hit harder than anything he could have staged. Just thought you should know. Most of the board at his firm reached out to me this morning. They're pulling his media plan and calling for a review. You changed the narrative, without raising your voice. Lena read it 3 times. Then she opened her back door, stepped into the tiny garden patch she'd neglected for years, and pressed her hands into the soil. It was time to plant something real. That afternoon, she met Beau on the pier. The wind curled around them like a hush, and the sun danced low on the water. How are you feeling? He asked, watching her as they walked. "Like I've let go of something I didn't know I was still holding," she said. He nodded, his hands in his coat pockets. "The truth does that." She turned to him, her voice soft. "I don't know where this ends." "The cart, the fund, you and me." But for the first time, "I'm not trying to control it." Bo stopped, looked at her fully. "I don't want an ending," he said. "I want a beginning that keeps becoming." Lena's breath caught, not from fear this time, from recognition. They stood in the golden hush of early evening, the whole city slow around them. And somewhere in that stillness, a new chapter began, without a script, without apology, just two people, quietly choosing something real. The final week of spring brought a kind of stillness to Charleston that only came after long, slow change. Like the hush after a heavy rain, when the world is soft and clean and ready. Lena stood outside the Bloom cart, adjusting the row of mason jars lined with freshly cut peonies. The early light bathed the market street in gold. She wore her gray linen apron, hair pinned loosely, and the same steady confidence she'd grown into over the past few months. Customers strolled by. A little girl stopped to point at a sunflower. An older man tipped his hat. It was a morning like any other, and yet Lena felt something humming underneath. Today was her last full day at the cart before shifting full-time to the root fund. The thought made her breath hitch, not from fear, but reverence. This cart had been her rescue, her declaration, and now it would be someone else's beginning. "Morning, boss," Annalise called out, carrying 2 coffees in hand. "Don't look too peaceful. I brought caffeine and unsolicited opinions." Lena laughed, reaching for one of the cups. Thank God. Annalise leaned against the edge of the cart. "You ready for tomorrow?" Lena nodded slowly. "Mostly, I haven't told Margaret yet. I want to bring her to the new office when it's finished. Show her the whole thing. She'll be proud." "I think so," Lena said, her voice quieter now. "She always told me flowers grow where the roots are deepest." I didn't realize she meant me. Annalise blinked fast. "Okay, rude. Now I'm emotional." They both laughed, and the moment softened. Then Lena's phone buzzed in her pocket. "Bo, remind me what time to pick you up tonight. I've got something planned." She smiled as she typed back, 7, and no surprises. His reply came instantly. Too late. She tucked the phone away and turned to help a couple picking out their anniversary bouquet, but her mind stayed on him. How he always gave her space without stepping away. How he never tried to finish her sentences, just made room for her to speak. When the last customer walked off with a ribboned bouquet, Lena began packing up the display. Each jar returned to its crate. Each stem carefully saved. She moved slower than usual, letting the weight of the moment settle gently. Annalise placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay to grieve what saved you." Lena nodded. "I'm not sad, just grateful." She closed the latch on the cart and turned to face the sun one last time in this role. Not as a goodbye, but as a bow. That evening, Bo picked her up in a navy button-down and a look she couldn't quite read. They drove in silence for a bit, the soft hum of the road between them. When they pulled up to a quiet corner downtown, Lena blinked. "The bakery?" Bo smiled. "Not just the bakery." He led her inside where the lights were dim and the back room had been transformed. Candles, string lights, soft jazz playing from an old record player. A long table stood in the center, covered in wildflowers and handwritten place cards. Lena turned slowly. "What is this?" "A thank you," Bo said. From some of the women the root fund already helped. They insisted. Just then, the door opened behind them, and in came a dozen familiar faces. Women from the market, small business owners, even Tessa, holding a clipboard and wearing a rare smile. Lena's throat tightened. "You built something that changed more than your own life," Bo said quietly, "and we thought you should see that." Tessa stepped forward and handed her a card. Inside was a list. Names, businesses, ideas. Dreams that were now growing, in no small part because Lena dared to start. "I don't know what to say," Lena whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Tessa replied. "You already did." They ate. They shared stories. And as the night deepened, the laughter grew louder, lighter. Lena moved through the room like someone who belonged, not as a guest, not as a centerpiece, but as a builder. A root. Near the end of the night, Bo found her by the window. "You okay?" She looked at him, eyes shining. "I'm better than okay." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, flat box. "No pressure," he said. "Just something I've been holding on to." Inside was a delicate gold necklace, shaped like a tiny camellia. "For who you are now," he said. "Not as a symbol, as a truth." She blinked, then reached for his hand. "I don't need a proposal to know this is real," she said. "I know," he whispered. "But when you're ready, I'll be here." She leaned in, rested her head against his shoulder, and let the moment hold. And in that quiet, beneath the glow of candles and the scent of peonies and hope, Lena understood. Some blooms never end. They just keep opening. The sun rose slow and golden over Charleston, spilling light across the porch of Lena's new space just off the parkway, half office, half greenhouse. The soft smell of damp soil and lemon verbena drifted from the garden beds lining the fence. Inside, the early morning felt sacred, still, like the world was holding its breath for something beautiful to begin. Lena stood at the back window, barefoot, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Her eyes drifted over the rows of seedlings on the work table, baby marigolds, lavender sprigs, and a single blooming camellia. She hadn't planted that one. Bo had. Outside, a woman parked her bike by the gate and walked up the stone path. Lena recognized her from a workshop the week before. Young, nervous, but curious, the way Lena used to be when the world felt too big and her own voice too small. Lena stepped out to greet her. "You found it." The woman nodded, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "I almost didn't come. But then I remembered what you said at the round table." Lena tilted her head. "Which part?" "That growth takes light, but it starts in the dark." A quiet smile spread across Lena's face. "Come on in. Let's see what you're growing." They walked inside together, the screen door creaking behind them. The woman unpacked her notes, photos of her small candle business, ideas for a cart, even a few scent samples. Lena listened, fully, like always, nodding, offering only what was needed. A question, a resource, a moment to breathe. By the end of their meeting, the woman looked different. Straighter posture, steadier hands. Before she left, she paused in the doorway. "I didn't think people like me could build something," she said. "People like you," Lena said softly, "are exactly who build the most lasting things." When the gate clicked behind her, Lena stood for a moment, alone with the quiet. She turned to her desk, picked up her sketchbook, the same one that had sat beside her bed all those years. It was nearly full now, not just with flower drawings, but plans, maps, ideas, born from things she once buried. The cart was still running. She'd passed it on to a woman named Elise, who had lost her job during the pandemic and had since grown it into something even more visible. Lena visited when she could, sometimes just to smile, sometimes to help tie ribbons. And Margaret, she was steady. Her memory still slipped some days, but her hands always found the camellias first when Lena brought her bouquets. She never forgot those. A gentle knock came from the front entrance. Beau. He stood holding a paper bag from her favorite bakery and 2 to-go mugs. "I figured you'd skipped breakfast again," he said, already stepping inside. "I was busy," she said, taking the bag with a grin. "But I'm not turning down a croissant." He followed her into the kitchen area, leaning against the counter while she unpacked the treats. "How's the fund?" he asked. "Growing faster than I can keep up with," she said. "We've got 10 active grants out now, 2 new carts, 1 food trailer, and a traveling ceramics studio run by a grandmother who bakes muffins between glazing sessions." He let out a low whistle. "Sounds like you built an empire." She glanced at him. "No. I built a table, and people just kept pulling up chairs." He crossed to her then, slow and easy, like always. His hand brushed her arm. "You ever think about what's next?" She leaned against the counter, her shoulder barely touching his. "Not in the old way. I don't plan 5 years out anymore. I just ask if it feels true." Beau nodded. "Does this?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a ring. No grand box. No big gesture, just a simple gold band resting in the center of his palm. Lena stared at it. Not with fear, not even with surprise. "I'm not asking you to change anything," he said. "Just to keep becoming, with me." She closed her fingers around his hand, the ring between them. "You already know the answer." "Say it anyway," he whispered. She looked up at him, eyes bright. Yes. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was planted, like everything else that mattered. Later that afternoon, Lena stood in the garden with a watering can in one hand, gently misting the edges of the soil. Children passed by on bikes. Someone waved from a porch. She waved back, the sunlight catching in her hair. She knelt near the back fence, beside the daisy patch, and pressed her fingers into the dirt. She tucked a new bloom in beside the others, a white camellia, clipped from the plant inside. A small wooden sign sat just behind it. Burned into the grain were 3 simple words: "Grow from here." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by things rooted deep and reaching wide, Lena smiled. Not because she'd escaped something hard, but because she'd created something whole. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought matters to me either way.